My name's Vaughan Smith, and I've been a freelance journalist for a while. And I set up something called Frontline, which is a club in London. And I'm very briefly going to tell you a bit about it. But it's this club which has a collaboration with OSF. And it's for this reason that we're here. We collaborate and work together. The club is London's press club. It's become an international place, and it's 6 years old. It's funded from a public restaurant, and it has a series of events. And so in its events room, we hold talks and screenings, book launches, press conferences. We do about 200 events a year, and we have a program of collaborating with people abroad, which is why we're here today. We also have we're starting a media division as well. And we've got a broadsheet documentary, blogs, and video archive. I'm going to show you a video because I think that this probably explains where we come from and who we are better. But I would suggest to you that it does have some pretty unpleasant scenes. So if you're squeamish, I would look away some of it. It's not something that we broadcast. It's not something that we make public. Because in a way, we made this when we were a bit angry, maybe. But it does, I think, express who we are as freelance video journalists. Essentially, we are like photojournalists, but using video cameras. And we worked in the media for about 15, coming on to 20 years, before I then started the Frontline Club. But we found, because we never got a credit, we couldn't really support a proper business. And so in the end, we stopped doing this, and I don't do so much of it. The person here is John D McHugh, and he represents, I believe, what we were. He's the modern version of us. I'm the old fart, and he's the guy with a bit of life left in him. But I'm going to show you the film, and then I think you'll understand us better. But as I say, it's got a bit of a health warning.
I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me, and I walk alone. I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one, and I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk up. My shadow's the only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me. Till then I walk alone.
For the last 15 years, independent freelance journalists have been at the sharpest end of television news gathering. Normally working alone and paying our own way, we are the freest part of the free press. The dangers have been great, and many independents have paid for their journalism with their lives. But we have provided news broadcasters with much of their best material.
I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk up. My shadow's the only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me. Till then I walk alone.
Frontline News helped pioneer independent video news gathering in the late 1980s, but closed in 2003. The agency is back. Now called On the Frontline, we will use the internet to support freelance video journalists all over the world. While encouraging the higher standards of journalism, we'll promote diversity, and we will show events as they really are, in the belief that the only way to reduce war is to show its real horror.
I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one, and I walk up my shadow's the only one that walks beside me. My shadow, heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone out there will find me.
Okay, well, this sort of journalism, as you can imagine, has a cost. We've lost 9 people, which is half our agency, in the 15 years that we operated. And this isn't something, a badge to wear with honor. We don't see it that way. But, you know, people who say, well, was it worth it? I argue against that. I believe it was, but it's a good question. But I use this to illustrate the fact that it is frustrating, as you can imagine, if broadcasters don't want this material, or if people claim that they can be ignorant and not know what's going on in the world, because it's all out there. If someone wants to know, they can find out. I mean, we're doing the work, we're risking our lives. If someone wishes to remain ignorant, not our fault. We've done our bit. And it's easy to have that feeling. But we're talking about Afghanistan. And in many years ago, when I had some hair, I went to Afghanistan, and I've been going pretty well ever since. But in those days, things were a little bit different, and I think this is very important to understand for this conversation about how things have changed in Afghanistan, because it's very different. For example, in 1987, the year before this, I was a soldier in the British Army, and I left, and my regiment is going there in September. I was out there September 2 years ago when they were there last. But in 1988, I could never have imagined, when the Russians were still there, that the British Army would be in Afghanistan. Apparently, I mean, how could one have thought there was any justification then for us being involved in a country that's been at war now for nearly 30 years, a country that's been pretty well destroyed? And so it does beg some questions, I would suggest, as a journalist, as to what we're doing there now. And maybe we can help answer some of those and discuss some of those. The point I want to make now is, in 1988, the Mujahideen, as they were called then, and these are the fathers of the people we're fighting now, and you guys have soldiers there, and so do we, they weren't seen as an enemy. They were seen in a heroic way. They were seen as the heroes fighting the great communist monolith of, you know, the Soviet Union. Somehow we're fighting these people now, or their sons, because not many of these people are still alive. But the sort of things we were filming then. We were with them, and so we were filming them fighting, and you're not seeing that on television now. And I think that's something we'll talk about, is what are we covering, and what access do we have to the story? And the picture below was obviously the Stinger missile, which was the big story to get, and which was an American-supplied weapon that brought down Russian helicopters that changed the course of the war. These were the sort of things we were doing then. But when we went in, I mean, the guy on the left got killed. He was my partner called Rory. We went in dressed in local dress. It was great, very exciting stuff. And we would go on mules across the mountains with the Mujahideen. And it was only later that we would start wearing flat jackets. And we didn't have anything like flat jackets. There were no safety procedures or anything like that. But if you compare it now, and this is I've only been in once for 5 years, which is obviously why John D is going to do most of the talking here because he knows what he's talking about. I'm completely out of date. We're wearing flat jackets, we're looking like soldiers, and we're with soldiers, and we're not with the local people at all. And I think that is an important point for what we're doing today. Now, that's all I have to say, except I want to introduce John D. And to do that, he's got to put his computer on, so you're going to have to be a little patient while we disconnect. While John's sorting himself out, and I'm going to disconnect the audio cable and hand it over to him now. John, I'll introduce him so that you know who you're talking to and save him the trouble. I'm British, but John is Irish. He was brought up in a rural part of the Irish Republic, but brought up at the time of the Troubles, and that's what we British call it. It may well be that he calls it something different, because at that time I was a British soldier in Ireland. So it's funny how journalism can make people see things in a similar way, and it does have the ability, I think, travel, to make friends out of potential enemies. John tells me that it was images of Vietnam and history books that got him introduced into interest in journalism, but that ultimately it was during the bombing of 9/11 that he actually felt a real urge to be a journalist. And then he went on to meet a photographer back from Afghanistan and was inspired. So he started doing shifts at AP and The Guardian, and then he got a job with the AFP, the Agence France Presse, and that got him to Iraq and Afghanistan, which is no mean feat. It is not easy as a journalist to get out there. In April 2007, he made, I think, a very significant step. He gave up the income he was getting to go completely freelance. And went out, but not as an ordinary freelance that I was, but as a multimedia freelance. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that. 5 weeks later, he was shot in an ambush and narrowly lost his life. But still, 5.5 months later, he was back in Afghanistan doing his journalism. It was then that I heard of him. His material had been sent to me for an award in the club I run. We give an award every year, and he won the award. And I was very pleased that he won the award, because he did seem to me to represent a sort of continuation, and a better one than what we did all those years before. But where it's most significantly different is that he does blogs, he shoots audio, video, and photographs. We just did video, so he's rather busier than we were. He's a one-man roadshow, and I think this is extremely important because, the questions of whether journalism as a consequence is better or not, I think, are interesting. And is it more effective? Do more people see it? So in a sense, John D uses new tools, but he has the same convictions we had. If you're set up now and you see one of his beautiful pictures, are we finding that light is a problem, by the way? Can you see the screen all right? Yeah, okay. John, please carry on.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Is this working? Yep, okay. Thanks very much for coming along. I hope that I can shed some light on what's going on in Afghanistan tonight. What I want to try and do with this is sort of cover two things at the same time. I want to talk about Afghanistan, and I spent a lot of time there in the last 3 years, and I think that there's a lot that people don't know about it, so I hope I can share a lot with you tonight. And then, as Vaughan said, I'm now, well, there's various terms, a multimedia practitioner. Some people say it sounds nice, other people would say a jack of all trades. But yes, this concept of multimedia. Is that better? Yeah? Okay. Getting told down the back. So yeah, the multimedia side of things, originally I'm a photographer, that's what I've done for years. And multimedia really came about because of what I was seeing in Afghanistan, in the wild places, where not very many other journalists were getting to. And I kind of felt compelled to tell the story in more ways than just photography. And so I started trying to figure out how to make short films and how to do audio and how to do these audio slideshows that were becoming used by, well, especially American papers back then. and how to write a reasonably coherent story, you know, good enough for a blog, you know, not going to get front page of the New York Times, but just enough to tell people what I was seeing. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to use photographs to try and illustrate some of what I'm talking about, and then later on I'll get into an audio slideshow, and then eventually I'll show you a film. Some of this will be organic as we go along, because I know Vaughan has lots of questions for me. We don't get to do this very often, so he's probably going to distract me loads of times, and we'll go off on tangents. And if you feel it's too much of a tangent, then you know, you're not going to upset me if you say get back on track and, you know, tell us more about Afghanistan or something. But so I'm going to start off with this is a picture from Iraq, not Afghanistan. This is 2005, and I was out there for AFP, and as we all know, you know, I don't give a history lesson tonight either, so I'm not going to go through lots of dreadfully dull dates. But basically, we know what happened in 9/11. We know that the Americans and subsequently the coalition of the willing fought in Afghanistan. And then we know that you know, the great misadventure that was Iraq sort of rushed up, and everybody got distracted by it. And I have to admit that I'm as guilty as everyone else, and I got distracted with Iraq. And when I was out there in 2005, the end of 2005, with British soldiers in Basra, they were talking about the upcoming deployment to Afghanistan in early 2006. And I thought, Afghanistan? What's going on in Afghanistan? You know, it's all Iraq right now. And so I went home and did a little bit of research and started looking at figures coming out of the Pentagon and reports of casualties in Afghanistan. And I realized that there was a hell of a lot of fighting still going on there, and it wasn't getting covered at all. Afghanistan's been called a forgotten war many times, and, you know, it once again proved that it was a forgotten war. So I arranged to go out to Afghanistan in early 2006. British were deploying for the first time, well, regular troops. They had special forces out there, but were deploying regular troops, and the Canadians were also deploying troops. The British Ministry of Defence didn't want journalists getting into Afghanistan, or into Helmand, their province, at all. And that's pretty much a red rag to a bull to any good journalist, so I wanted to get in there. But it didn't look possible initially. The Canadians were much more willing to take people in. So in spring 2006, I got to Afghanistan. And initially, I mean, I guess I did have lots of preconceived notions about what I was going to see in Afghanistan. A lot of it was probably influenced by the type of footage that came out of the Frontline years before. And I had seen lots of because these guys used to walk in, as Vaughan showed, they would walk in over the mountains from Pakistan, go up to Chitral and get on mules or walk across the mountains into Afghanistan. Luckily, I didn't have to do that. I flew to Dubai and flew in on, the first time I went, I flew from Europe on Ariana Afghan Airlines, which subsequently got banned from Europe for their poor safety record. But so I got to Afghanistan and I saw, you know, these flowing burqas, which is, I think, you know, the classic image of Afghanistan. But I also didn't see a lot of mountains because I was in the south, and it was the first sort of, you know, surprise. It was like, this is a huge country, and there's such a variation of landscape, and there's, you know, subsequently that, you know, became a variation of people and a variation of different fighters and a variation of different causes. I didn't get all that at the start. I just knew that it looked different than I expected. One thing I did encounter very early on was the poppy and the heroin production that was just completely open. This is a picture I was telling a journalist who interviewed me earlier about. This is the stupid picture that I nearly got killed over, which doesn't really look worth it in the end. But yeah, what was quite shocking was the fact that the opium growing and the harvesting, what they're doing here is harvesting the opium, or the paste that would be used to make opium. And it was just completely open. This is standing on the side of the road. I'm with a Canadian unit, and it's just happening completely openly. And yet in the UK, I'd listened to a lot of nonsense. I'd listened to the Defence Secretary John Reid make his what I consider to be extremely dishonest and disingenuous statement that he hoped that British troops could carry out their mission in Afghanistan without firing a shot, which was either, you know, he was either very badly informed or he was a barefaced liar. That's the fact. I had done little bit of research, and it was clear to see there was a lot of fighting going on in Afghanistan. So it was very, very, very unlikely that British troops were going to carry out their mission without firing a shot. But they were also talking about the eradication of poppies and knocking out this opium trade, which delivers apparently 90% of Europe's heroin to the streets. But when I got there, these guys were harvesting it openly, and nobody was doing anything about it. The vastness of the land was quite staggering as well. Just seeing these this is a shura, these meetings that happen, and just just going outside of a village and sitting on these huge rocks. And I remember, this is a few days in Afghanistan, and I just thought that people have probably been sitting on these rocks holding meetings for hundreds and hundreds of years, and I'm sure that's what you saw in the mountains. Well, just the vastness of it, it's staggering. I mean, in Iraq, Iraq once was a fairly normal functioning country with roads and electricity, and a lot of that is a mess now. But Afghanistan has never been that developed. It really is an unspoiled country.
My uncle went there when he was a hippie on the hippie trail in the 60s, and I don't think it's a desirable place for any hippies now.
No, I don't think so. Getting into the mountains, it becomes apparent very quickly why the coalition, and particularly the Americans, have not had much luck finding Osama bin Laden or anyone else that they're looking for. The place is so awe-inspiring, so staggering. The mountains are just... It's really hard to describe it, and even the photographs don't do it justice. But when you get out there and you see these huge peaks and these massive valleys, I mean, you could be standing on one side of this this rock, and Osama bin Laden and all his guys could be standing, the other side, and they wouldn't be, maybe more than a mile away, and you might as well be 1,000 miles away. And this idea that America has wonderful technology, and they can see everything that goes on. They can have all the the predators and the spy planes, everything else that you can imagine, but it's still such a wild country that really the only way to deal with it is by getting out on the ground and having troops there. Because otherwise you just don't have a chance.
John, the translators would like us to slow a little bit down.
Sorry, I'm Irish. I talk fast. Okay.
Not stop.
No, I can hear it. Okay. With the Canadians who I went to first, I mean, I saw fighting within a few days, and where the British defense minister had made this statement about hoping that the British soldiers wouldn't have to fire a shot, and they talked about reconstruction. The mission was constantly described as reconstruction, and subsequently was described by the parachute regiment, the first British troops that went in there, as a deconstruction mission because they blew up so much. The Canadian public were being told that it was a peacekeeping mission because apparently Canadians don't do wars, but they know how to keep the peace. But of course, as I say, within days, it was clear that it was a straight-up fight. There were shootouts and mortars and IEDs blowing up vehicles. There was 4 guys killed, just down the road from me, and I'd say just a few days. So it was clear that there was a war going on as opposed to a peacekeeping mission. And I was quite shocked by it because, even though I'm fairly dubious of anything the military spokespeople have to say, I was shocked by the level of, again, what I would say was dishonesty. There was a lot of fighting going on straight up. This is a reconnaissance, a Canadian reconnaissance unit that I was with, and these pictures caused a lot of controversy because basically what they're doing is kicking in a door, taking prisoners taking guys who allegedly were Taliban, and whisking them off to well, God knows where. But the Canadian military lawyers tried to stop me putting these pictures out. They said that I'd broken the embedding rules, which I hadn't. I know the rules fairly well. Then they said that I was breaching the Geneva Convention by holding these people up to public ridicule, which I disputed and said that in fact it was valid news gathering. They said that I had identified them when clearly I haven't shown any of their faces. And so the military, the lawyers, pretty much tried to bully me into not putting these pictures out. But it was only when I tried to be reasonable with them, but it was only when I found out that it was basically an order that had come down from politicians who hadn't even seen the photographs. They just didn't like the sound of photographs of Canadians in a war, and that was when I said, you know, they could basically stick it up their ass. I was putting the pictures out, and they wanted to stop me. They'd have to take my laptop off me or take my cameras off me. But it caused a big stir because, you know, it broke with the idea that there was a war going on. Again, it was, you know, it was supposedly peacekeeping for Canadians, and it blatantly wasn't true. Getting out into Helmand with the British was a bit trickier, but I eventually managed to get in there, and this is the first foot patrol in Helmand, and it was very difficult to get into Helmand. It was very difficult to get to the British because Afghanistan is a pretty dangerous place to travel around. But once I got there, the guys on the ground, you know, their attitude was, well, if you got this far, you can stick with us, and which is generally, I find, the attitude. The soldiers on the ground, you know, want people to know what they're doing, just like everyone else. It's the politicians at the top who try to give us, you know, their spin on things, and they're the ones that like to control what you're doing. You won't see this in Helmand. This is before the first British soldiers were killed, and everybody seemed to think it was going to be a walk in the park. It changed pretty quickly. So I left Afghanistan, and I got back to London, and that was when things really kind of got crazy for me, because when I got back, I realised how little information there was about the fighting in Afghanistan. I realised how little information there was, and also I realised how little appetite there was. And I'd just gone through, you know, nearly 2 months of a lot of madness, and not very many photographs were being used. Nobody really wanted to hear about Afghanistan, and so it kind of took me over. I mean, I'll admit that it kind of got some sort of Afghan madness, and I just wanted to go back straight away. I wanted to spend more time out there and really, you know, try and make more of an effort to get people to understand what was going on. And eventually I talked to AFP into sending me back out. When I arrived out, things had changed. I got back out less than 6 months later, and the Canadian troops that had just deployed in the spring were now, you know, hardened soldiers, where before they'd been, a lot of them had been kids really, and they were you know, they were the grizzled fighters now. I remember being in the back of one of their armoured vehicles, and I was on a way out to a base, and I was talking to a young guy, and I think he was 19, and he said to me, we're talking in the back of an armoured vehicle as we bounced around, and he said to me, you know, before I came out here, I didn't know if I was going to be able to do my job. He said, I didn't know if I could shoot someone. I didn't know if I could, you know, protect the guys that I'm with. I didn't know if I would let my team down. And he said, now I'd shoot someone in a heartbeat, man, woman, or child, because I want to go home alive. And that was really shocking to hear, particularly from the Canadians, because they are seen as sort of a peaceful nation. And this guy wasn't saying to me that, you know, he wanted to get out there and kill lots of Afghans, but he'd had a couple of friends killed and he had a couple of friends wounded, and he was scared and he wanted to go home, and he was now ready to do whatever was necessary in order to survive. And that was a massive change. That was you know, it was a sea change in the mindset, and I saw it all over the place.
Was that different in Iraq? Experience in Iraq.
The guys that I was with in Iraq, well, they were British. The guys that I met in Iraq were, they had a lot of experience. I mean, they'd been in Northern Ireland before. I remember doing a night patrol through Basra, like a foot patrol at night, and things got a little bit, well, out of hand. And the sergeant that I was with said, you know, we were talking about various problems they were encountering. I was asking about different tactics that the insurgents were using. And I was talking about Northern Ireland because I grew up in Ireland, and I you know, draw a lot of comparisons to other insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places to what I know from the experience in Ireland. And I asked him, was he seeing, you know, asked him about various tactics, and he said to me straight up, he said, we're seeing so many similarities out here, things that we saw in Northern Ireland, that we're just waiting to pick up a raghead with a Paddy accent. I don't mean to offend anyone, that's a direct quote. But yeah, they were I think much more, they were in Iraq, they weren't as shocked by it.
Yeah. Because I very much got that impression that in Afghanistan it was a different order of conflict. And I think it's quite significant because the British public certainly and the American public certainly, did not appreciate the nature and the violence in Afghanistan, which I think superseded, was far greater. It was like the sort of war that our grandfathers fought, was the impression I got, and I wondered if you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think what's really interesting about Afghanistan is it is such a rural. So many of the villages that I've been to are completely isolated, and they just want to live their own little life, away from everybody else, just do their own thing. And very much like where I grew up in rural Ireland on a farm, history, time passes, a lot slower, and people remember a lot more. So, where I grew up, people will talk about events that happened 100 years ago, particularly when my lot fought his lot. And they will talk about it like it happened a few days ago. It's amazing. And when I went to Helmand particularly, where the British had fought, less than 100 years ago, and, well, they'd fought 150 years ago, and then 120 years ago, and then less than 100 years ago. But the British had suffered a particularly, significant defeat in that part of the country, and the Afghans talked about it like it was yesterday. And their lifespan is a lot shorter, so generationally they would be further removed from the events than I would be from the events I hear about at home. But they did talk about it like it was yesterday, and this pride in their martial ability, this memory, this warrior ethos was far more prevalent in Afghanistan than I saw in Iraq.
Something that'll amuse you is that my great-grandfather fought in Afghanistan in 1887 in Kandahar and Helmand.
Well, you didn't do a very good job, did you? With the fighting, and this is down in Kandahar with the Canadians. Again, it's constant. So many things are shocking about the place, about the country. But what really took my attention on this trip was the fact that it was like, again, going back in time, but it was like going back to the First World War. These guys had dug trenches in the mud, and they'd sandbagged it, and they were holding small positions that were, fairly irrelevant at times, and just living amongst these sandbags in these trenches. And it was just unbelievable. It was like, this is the 21st century, supposedly modern warfare. What happened to smart bombs? What happened to, all the technology that you can bring to bear? And it was interesting because the soldiers explained a lot of it just wouldn't work in Afghanistan. These mud walls, sorry, this is misleading as it's a trench, but just on the top there you can see a bit of a mud wall, and you can't see any there, but these mud walls, which, are massively thick and have been baked in the sun for years and years and years. I've seen these things hit with 50 caliber machine guns. I've seen them hit with RPGs or with the equivalent, coalition equivalent, and they just stand there with like maybe a little scorch mark on them. Like, they're unbelievably strong. They're mud walls. But you can shoot at them all day, and if there's a Taliban on the other side of it, he's going to wait till you're out of ammo, he's going to pop up and shoot you. They also retain heat. They retain massive heat from the sun. So it screws up all the thermal imaging that the coalition use, not just on the ground, but their helicopters and their aircraft. So they can't pick out, you see this footage of, the classic black and white footage from an airplane or a helicopter. Oh yeah, we got guys moving around, and then they shoot one. But it wouldn't work here because the bloody terrain was working against them. And so it had reduced these guys back to the basics of, having a rifle and a bayonet and going out and fighting, face to face, which of course suited the Taliban very well because that's the only option they have. But it wasn't really in the coalition's game plan. Then I decided that I wanted to see a little bit more of the country. I wanted to get out of the south. I've been in Helmand, I've been in Kandahar, and I also wanted to experience the Americans. I hadn't been with the Americans before, and I'd heard all the baby eating, civilian shooting, murdering, crazy, lean green killing machine stories. And so, I have to say I was a bit dubious about, what I might encounter, but there's a hell of a lot more American soldiers in Afghanistan. Even then, there was more than I think pretty much everyone else put together. There's even more now. And so, I did another one of my really stupid things that I do in Afghanistan. To get to these guys, I had to dress up as a local. I luckily had quite a big beard and wear shellbrook kameez and a hat, and get my driver to pick me up from Bagram base. And you know, the difficulty is in this situation, you don't even tell your driver most of the time where you're going. And the guy that I use out there, I really trust. And it's not that I think he'd sell me out, but you never know if maybe somebody in his family's been kidnapped or there's pressure on him. And so it's really difficult. You don't tell anyone, you know, where you're going or what you're doing. And in fact, the night before I did this drive, I wrote the dreaded death letters, you know, one for my girlfriend and one for my family to sort of, you know, if I don't come back, this is how I feel about you guys, which is pretty crappy to actually have to sit down and write. So and I got him, you know, I said, look, I need to go to Kabul, and I got him to drive me to Kabul, and then I said, I need to get some shalwar kameez, and I got some shalwar kameez, and then I said, well, now I need to go to Gardez. And he was like, no, Mr. John, we can't go there. And I was like, well, we're going there. And so, you know, a couple of $100 later, and we're driving, you know, hell for leather down the road. And again, it's something that in 2006 seems like a reasonable risk to take, but looking back on it, I think, what the hell was I doing? You know, I'm not going to fool anyone looking like a. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't dream of doing it now. And again, I in an interview I did earlier, I talked about the poppy story, and you know, another really dumb thing that I did in Afghanistan. And you know, we all make mistakes. I seem to specialize in it, but we all, you know, make these mistakes. But I think the trick working in this environment is to try and learn from them. You know, you do something, you realize afterwards, Christ, that wasn't a good idea. And you know, you, rather than beat yourself up about it, the trick is, you know, okay, don't do that again. So arriving with the Americans, I didn't encounter the lean green killing machines that I expected. I arrived for Thanksgiving, and there was church service and cake and joy all around, and it was you know, very much an anticlimax, I have to say. And you know, these guys, it's interesting with the Americans because they spend a year on their tours. The British and the Canadian troops do 6 months, and I don't think it really is sufficient. I don't think they get enough time to understand their surroundings, the complexities of the various fights that are going on. Not just, you know, their fight with the Taliban, which in itself is misleading because the Taliban is not one monolithic organization, but many disparate groups. But also, there's various other insurgents. There's other warlords, factions like Hekmatyar and Haqqani. You've got just straight up criminality going on as well. And so I think that the Americans spending a year there gives them an opportunity to learn a lot more about the environment that they're working in and try to, you know, pick their way a little more carefully amongst the problems that they face. But what was also interesting was just the fact that so many of them were kids. I mean, you know, I'm 36 in a few days, and I still like to think that I'm fairly young, but these guys are like half my age. And, you know, I can sort of see how journalists can come away from them and be quite disparaging about them. And, you know, they have like different values than those that I hold, and they're quite childish in a lot of ways, but they're also, you know, a lot more adult than certainly I was when I was 18. But yeah, to see these guys, you know, they'd saved up their meat and their little party for Thanksgiving, and they welcomed me in and said, you know, gave me some of their treats, some of their food, and let me sit around their stove because it was freezing cold. And it was the whole thing I'm trying to get across here is it was very different to what I expected going to the Americans, because we hear such negative stories about the Americans all the time. I don't sound like some massive apologist for all American soldiers. What I'm trying to do with this whole thing tonight is I want to tell you what I've seen. I want to show you what I've seen, so I can put my hand in my heart and say this is the truth as I saw it in this one place. But I do think it's important. A lot of the soldiers that I've met, you know, they've become three-dimensional characters to me. I never went to Afghanistan to become, you know, an expert on soldiers. I wanted to go and see the war and talk to more Afghans. But it's very difficult to talk to the Afghans. Even the ones I come in contact with, I always make the point that I'm Irish. You know, I'm not British, I have no allegiance to their army. I'm not American, I have no allegiance to them. I'm not Canadian, I'm not Dutch. You know, I'm an Irish guy, and I'm there independently. And I do my best, you know, to through translators and through my very dodgy Pashto, do my best to talk to the Afghans and find out what they think about things. But the truth is, I can't go walking down the road, I can't waltz around the bazaar and talk with people because I'll get killed. That's it, straight up. So by default, I've come to focus more on the soldiers. And so what I'm trying to explain here is that they are three-dimensional characters. You know, guys do have families at home and they have kids that they worry about. And, you know, there was one soldier that I'll show you later on who, you know, had spent 10 years as a ranger, as a, you know, real badass and killed loads of people and, was also a Catholic, a devout Catholic, and talked to me a lot about how he reconciled his religion with his job. And, it's bizarre, but, these are the details that make you realize that they're real people. And I think it's much more difficult to understand, some of the things that happen, but I think it's far more useful to understand that than to look at them as a two-dimensional representation, the stormtroopers of the evil empire, that kind of nonsense. It gets cold in Afghanistan. It gets really cold. In the winter, once the snow comes down, it's the end of fighting season. There's this like, it's like football season. You've got fighting season starts in April when the snows melt and the passes free, and you can get through the mountain passes into Afghanistan, and then pretty much everything closes up when the snow comes down in November or December, and the passes get blocked and everybody sort of locks down, except the guys that I was with who insisted on driving around in the snow for a while. And it's that really strange thing where, within the space of a few hours, I had one of the most amazing experiences of my life, which was lying down to sleep in the snow with fires all around and this beautiful orange light. I was cold as hell. This beautiful orange light, this glow, and snowflakes coming down, because I'm just sleeping out in a sleeping bag and a bivy bag. I'm just thinking, this is amazing, this is so beautiful, and I'm so privileged to be here. And then the next day, falling off that cliff and dislocating my knee and generally having a rotten old time climbing down the mountains. And it's another thing that's really interesting about Afghanistan. It never gets told very much. The place is dangerous. Without anyone shooting at you, the place is dangerous. I always think it's awful when you hear these reports about, the British media do it all the time. 156 soldiers have been killed and 176 have died. So, you got a number it's almost like, well, they didn't die fighting, so they don't count. But you know what? I've seen guys turn over vehicles, while trying to drive up the side of a mountain that no sane person would do. So lots of things happen in these wars that you don't really get explained to you, but it's just as dangerous, and there's no way anyone would do. I wouldn't normally walk. it's hard to see there, but there's a 300-foot drop off the edge of that. Luckily, I only fell about 6 feet. But no, in normal peacetime, or sane person wouldn't walk across there because it's just too bloody dangerous. So I eventually got home, and this was around the time that I decided I was going to leave AFP and go back out as a freelancer. This was because I wanted to spend more time in Afghanistan. I'd really decided that this was a story I wanted to tell full time. I didn't want to be distracted by anything else. And it was also when I sort of threw myself into multimedia. And as I said earlier, it wasn't that, I thought, hey, I think I'll be a filmmaker now, or, I think I'll start writing and do a book. It really was a case of I was seeing things that pretty much nobody else was seeing. There were very few journalists in Afghanistan at all, because everybody was in Iraq. And the ones that were in Afghanistan, most of them, you've got an editor breathing down your neck. You get maybe 4 or 5 days in the field, and then they want a story, or they want photos, or they want you home, because it's too expensive. And the World Cup is starting, and we need somebody to do that. So I sort of gave everything up, gave up my job, took what money I had saved, and got some other kit for multimedia, video camera, audio, that kind of thing. Organized a 9-month embed with the Americans, which was, again, very difficult to do because they wouldn't take people normally for that length of time. But I convinced them I was going to do this full fighting season embed, and I was going to stay for the whole 9 months, and I was going to walk in the shoes of the soldiers. I was really going to understand what it was like to be in a war. So, as they say, be careful what you wish for, because I only lasted 5 weeks. I'm going to scoot through these pretty quickly because time is getting away from us, and also because I've told this story a lot of times, and it starts to sound a bit dull to me, but I'm sure you all know this is basically when I got shot. So getting up into the mountains in Nuristan, you'll know this landscape because this is just across from Chitral, so this is where you used to walk in from. I got dropped off at this base, like just way up in the, at the peak, and within a few days it was getting attacked fairly regularly. The soldiers would still go on patrol. One of the problems about being in the mountains is that even if you walk out from a peak, when you walk down the mountain, eventually you have to walk back up the mountain. And wearing body armor and a helmet, because obviously, that's what you have to do these days, and carrying you know, stills cameras and video cameras and spare batteries and a medical kit and, you know, probably loads of other crap that I really don't need, but I'm convinced I do. It's, you know, it's exhausting. It's a really tough landscape to work in, and that's without getting attacked.
The sort of weight you'd carry, how would that compare to the soldiers?
It's about even. We weighed up one stills camera with lens on it and a long lens, and a video camera weighs about the same as a rifle. My body armor is the same. You know, I have to carry as much water and as much other supplies, so it's pretty much the same. But they're all a lot younger and fitter than I am. So yeah, so basically this is an attack. This is, you know, coming under fire. What I always find interesting about these pictures is that they don't look like real war pictures, but this is it. This is straight up. This is what it's like to be in the middle of a gunfight. And you know, this really sort of brings home the point that I was trying to make. I love still photography. I'm a photographer at heart. I do other things, but I am a still photographer, and I believe that the power of a still image can't be surpassed by anything else. But it can't do everything on its own. And looking at these pictures, you know, we've all seen thousands of photographs like this before, and I bet you that 99% of them are fake pictures, because I have seen photographers doing it. I've seen footage, you know, and the famous one is Prince Harry, you know, the British Prince Harry when he was out in Afghanistan. You see that, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was played in the UK just on a loop, and it's Harry shooting a 50 cal machine gun, and it, you know, he wasn't shooting anything. It was just a test fire. He's like, you know, just push the button down, shoot, good for the cameras. Oh yeah, look, he's our prince. He's great. It was bullshit. And most of the photographs you see are bullshit. And you know this as well. You see this footage.
I remember in 2001 going into Afghanistan, and this was when the Taliban were defeated initially, that led to this. There were 3,000 journalists 1 mile inside Afghanistan in a camp. And the local Northern Alliance had 8 types of trip that I recall, people going on. One involved a donkey ride, which was obviously much enjoyed. Another was a sort of fake firing episode, but you can imagine it. There were only 250 to 300 journalists who went over the pass down to the Kabul plain. But in a sense, what's happened to journalism is it's become commoditized. It's a product, and companies want to deliver it as easily as they can. There were a lot of journalists. It's not necessarily the journalist's fault, and there are a lot of journalists who have the highest of standards. But in a sense, it's the finances that matter, and if it can be delivered cheaply, then it will do. The other thing I think is very important to appreciate is that as news is a commodity, it's also provided, much of it, by very few sources, agencies. So actually where the news comes from for an international audience is very few places, which is why I think it's terribly important that people like John D are out there on their own, without much support, delivering extra material, because without it, it wouldn't exist.
So anyway, they're real war photographs, but they don't look like much. And this was when, as I say, it really sort of brought the point home to me that, you know, I need to be doing video and audio and writing about it and doing as many different things as I can to explain to people what's going on out there. Then I talked the Americans into taking me on an air assault. What's amazing, again, the Americans, man, I tell you, they are the people to embed with. If anyone here wants to go see a war, go embed with the Americans, because you'll get front row access. I mean, you sign a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of disclaimers, you don't sue for losing limbs or, you know, airplanes crashing out of the sky or anything, but man, once you sign the paperwork and they take you in, you can go anywhere and do anything. And people talk about censorship, they talk about the dangers of embedding and the fact that you're controlled. It's not true. Not in Afghanistan anyway. Nobody's ever stopped me, the Americans, nobody's ever stopped me taking a photograph of anything that I wanted. No one's ever gotten in my way. No one's ever said you can't go there. I've done whatever the hell I've wanted. Now, I've heard a lot of different stories out of Iraq. I've heard people talk about all sorts of problems. But I can tell you, from my point of view, 3 years in Afghanistan, I've gone wherever I wanted and I've seen whatever I wanted. This was an air assault that was going on, and I said, I heard it was happening, and I said, I want to come too. So they had to train me how to, like, you know, jump out of a helicopter. When a helicopter comes in, it kind of hovers just to the end of the ground, and basically you have to sort of almost, you run out and jump, you know, before it's properly on the ground. And these guys put me, they lined out the different units that were going, different helicopters, and they put me so that I would be last in to a helicopter, which meant that when it landed, I'd be first off. So for this air assault, I was the first guy off the first helicopter in what was expected to be what's called a hot LZ. So basically they're expecting to get shot at a lot because they didn't have any base up here. And I mean, seriously, and I said to him, you've got to be kidding. No way I'm going to be the first. What happens if they start shooting? And the guy said to me straight up, he said, hey man, it's better to be the first guy off. They'll be shooting all over the place. It's the last guy that gets off, they'll have him zeroed. I was like, it's unbelievable. So he said, just run out, turn around, drop on your knee, run out about 20 feet, drop around, turn around. Man, you get cool pictures as we run off. And the thing is, he was right. and we didn't get shot at that day, so it was pretty good. What's also interesting with the Americans is seeing the fact that they spend a year in country, just how honed they get. These guys are getting ready to go out on a patrol, and what they're doing here is basically taking all the kit out, checking they've got what they need, checking it's all packed in the right place, making sure that those annoying little wire ties are taken off the ammunition can, so that if they do get in a fight, which they did pretty much every day up here, you know, when they need to reload, they don't have to go, oh, have you got a wire cutter? Oh no, I can't open this damn thing. Oh, so just, you know, these little things, but you just see how slick they are about it, and then you see why. On this day, you know, I went out with the guys. They were going on what seemed to be a fairly normal mission. Going to be a few days. Everything changed very quickly. A unit nearby got ambushed. They were getting messed up really badly actually not by the Taliban. In this area, it's mostly Al Qaeda, foreign fighters, and then you've got the Nuristanis who sometimes fight with Al Qaeda, sometimes fight against them, sometimes fight amongst themselves. It's a really particularly messy area. And in fact, after I got shot and whatever, a few months later, there was a Guardian journalist. I do a lot of work with the Guardian, and there was a Guardian journalist who was in Afghanistan in the south, and he went to spend some time with the Taliban, and he said to them, oh, you know, a colleague of mine, they said, you know, you're a crazy guy coming out here, whatever, and he said, well, you know, a colleague of mine got shot, nearly died up in Nuristan, and the Taliban commander said to Kate, Nuristan? Fucking crazy up there. That's where all the foreign fighters are. So even the Taliban in Helmand wouldn't go to Nuristan because they said it's so crazy. And it is. So anyway, the fight took place. This is helicopters shooting over our heads. Very messy. This guy in the middle, Sergeant Best, was the guy that I talked about training the soldiers. You know, particularly smart guy. And it had this aura about him. He just knew what he was doing. So you always felt that if you were close to him, that things would be all right. Unfortunately, lots of other people had the same idea, so it became quite dangerous to be close to him. This is an Afghan soldier who's been shot and who's dying. But what was awful was the fact that the other Afghan soldiers had decided, well, he's done for. And so nobody was giving him any first aid, any medical treatment. And an American soldier ran up, Sergeant Sears, and basically was like, you know, didn't speak Pashto, but certainly made himself understood to the Afghan soldiers that it wasn't okay to just let their guy die. And it was just really interesting. I mean, it's pretty tough to take photographs like this, but it's also really interesting to see how in the heat of the moment that you know, people can make themselves understood without language. So everything was going really badly at this stage. I was hiding behind a Humvee. These two guys had been trapped behind some rocks, and then they had to make a run over open ground. And a lot of this day I don't really remember photographing. A lot of it was just natural impulse. You know, your conscious mind is concentrating on not getting shot, so you're hiding behind rocks, you're moving behind Humvees, trying to figure out where the shooting is coming from because it moves, and that's what you concentrate. And so you're exposing and shooting pictures really without thinking about it. But I do remember this picture because I pretty much thought that these guys were going to get shot in front of me as they ran towards me. Happily they didn't. Then it all went really horribly wrong. That's what it looks like when you get shot. Yeah, fairly nasty. And this is a weird one. This is a picture that I took after I was shot. This is after I'd been treated. I was waiting to be put on a medevac helicopter and we'd be flown out of there. And I saw this guy beside me on a stretcher, and I shot some pictures of him. And again, I don't really remember much of it. But when I saw the pictures afterwards, I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I remember that. And a lot of people have said, you know, why were you shooting pictures after being shot? I was like, well, you know, it's that impulse thing again. It's like that's what we do.
How did you take that picture of yourself shot?
That was one of the soldiers that I'd befriended who came over to me. He was really upset that I'd been hurt, and I was like, hey, take a picture of me. And he was like, no way, man. I was like, hey, if you were shot, I would take a picture of you. And it's something that I always say to units when I go to them. You know, it's difficult. A lot of time when you turn up to a unit, it's really tough because, especially, the truth is, a lot of journalists, I think, go to cover conflicts for the wrong reason. A lot of journalists, not all, but a lot of journalists think that it's going to be good for their career. It's a tick on the CV, on the resume, did a bit of war, and that's the wrong reason to go and cover a conflict. And as a result, a lot of them will piss off the soldiers. So a lot of times I turn up to units and they don't want you there. You're just another goddamn journalist. You're a pain in the ass. They got to look after you. They wonder if you're going to freak out once the shooting starts. Then, you know, your job as a journalist is to win them over, to convince them that even though every other journalist in the world is an asshole, you're not. You're a good guy. That's part of the skill. But, you know, so you do all the sort of nice chat to them and try and win them over. I'm Irish, you know, I'm a good guy. But one of the things I do always say is, you know, if someone gets hurt, someone gets killed, I'm going to take pictures because I'm here to cover everything. And you might not like it at the time. You might want to punch me, but I'm going to do it. So this was a bit of a turnaround. And yeah, eventually got him to take that picture. So that was it. I went off, you know, I recovered eventually. It was all very unpleasant, but I'm not going to dwell. And it's not, you know, I mean, I'm not terribly sensitive about it. But, you know, I just find it quite boring because, well, basically I didn't die. 18 blokes got killed that day. 11 of the guys were wounded. Some of them really, I mean, I was wounded really badly as well. But, you know, there was one guy, he emailed me a few months ago, and it's like over 2 years since it happened. And he's emailed me loads of times. We stay in a lot of contact. And he emailed me and he said, hey, dude, check it out. I'm typing this with my own hand this time. And so for the previous 2 years, his wife had been writing the emails that I got because he'd been shot in the arm and he'd had 2 pieces of bone blown out of his arm. And they'd actually had to put bone marrow from a cadaver, from a dead body, into his arm and gradually grow the bone back. I didn't know you could do these things. And so he was so excited when he emailed me to tell me that he was typing it with his own hand. So, you know, other guys got hurt really badly. So I got shot. Yeah, it was really shitty and I didn't like it. And I definitely hope it doesn't happen again. Couldn't recommend it to anyone. But it's just one of those things. Now I'm going to skip on a little bit because this is all taking a little bit of time. Now that I'm speaking so slowly for the translator. But basically I went back after I got shot. It was pretty nervy. I was pretty jumpy when I went out. But I did manage to get back out and do some work. Sorry, just bear with me a second. What I want to show you now is it's an audio slideshow. So this is sort of just a little bit of multimedia. When I went back out in the autumn of '07, I spent some time with the unit, and subsequently some other guys from their base were killed in an IED, in an improvised explosive device. What's often called a mine or a roadside bomb, although in fact they're under the roads. It's something that actually pisses the soldiers off a lot when they hear people talking about roadside bombs, because roadside bombs, that's a term that's come out of Iraq because Iraq had paved roads, and so you had to put the bombs at the side of the road most of the time. You'd hide it at the side of the road and it would blow up, so it would hit the side of a vehicle and kill the guys. And so, you know, particularly the Americans designed their vehicles with lots of armor on the side so it could withstand the blast. And then they went back to Afghanistan, and you know it's one size fits all. You know, hey, we bought this gear for Iraq, but you got to use it in Afghanistan too. But Afghanistan doesn't have tarred roads, so they aren't roadside bombs. They're just bombs that are put under the road. And what's particularly unpleasant is now you've got vehicles that are armored at the side, and when an explosion goes off underneath, it's not hitting the side; it's going off underneath, and all that pressure comes up through the vehicle, and it doesn't just kill guys; it blows them to very small pieces. Not me. So this is an audio slideshow, and basically what you've got here is a series of photographs, eulogy read by the commander of the 2 soldiers that had been killed. This was one of the toughest things that I've had to do, just because it was so sad. But the soldiers themselves had pretty much insisted that I cover this. They wanted people to see everything that they go through. So hopefully you can hear this.
On the 12th of November, we lost 2 great warriors. We lost a true commander and his gunner, and it hurts. Under the leadership of Captain Dave Morris and the watchful gunner's eye of Sergeant Adrian Hike, Animal Troop has fought like warriors, engaged the people of northern Bromell like diplomats, coordinated for indirect fire and close air support with precision, and all the while looked after one another like brothers. This is a family of warriors. The warriors we've lost were incredibly proud of being members of the elite airborne cav. They wore their spurs and Stetsons knowing they represented nearly 200 years of tradition, and they did it with every bit of the swagger of their forebears in historical battles on other frontiers. Dave Boris and Adrian Hike were extraordinary men. I know from speaking to Dave on the radio in the middle of many indirect and direct firefights how cool and calm he was under pressure. I heard from his loyal lieutenants about his great sense of humor, chiding First Sergeant Lunsford about the significance of the troop's own fictional First Name Friday tradition. On a Friday morning, you might hear Captain Boris make a call over the troop command net, that is if he was within earshot of First Sergeant. First Name Friday, everyone. Hey, Donnie, it's Dave. Give me a sit rep. And if you know First Sergeant Lunsford's strict adherence to standards and discipline, you can just imagine his reaction. And then smiles all around the Anvil command post. Building a team is an art, and keeping morale high takes talent, genuine concern, and creativity. Dave Boris had those rare gifts. Captain Dave Boris loved his soldiers in a unique way with every inch of his being. In speaking with his wife, Jamie, there was something that was absolutely clear to her. Dave loved what he was doing and was totally devoted to leading his paratroopers well. Sergeant Hike was a tough and dependable NCO, and everyone who knew him realized that he had what it takes to lead soldiers at a much higher level. He was absolutely fearless. And anyone that goes into an Irish pub in Germany to watch a match between England and Germany wearing Manchester colors, well, they've got to be fearless. Why was Sergeant Hike the commander's gunner? Let me tell you, it's one of those few positions as a commander that you know you're going to fill with a superstar, and Sergeant Hike was a superstar. I think if you asked every paratrooper in this troop who they want by their side in a fight, to a man they'd say, Sergeant Hike, no doubt. I spoke with Sergeant Hike's father a few nights ago, and he explained to me that he and his wife tried to raise their son to stand on his own 2 feet. It was a privilege to be able to tell him that their son Adrian had passed the same lesson on to the soldiers that he led in Anvil Troop. In speaking with Jamie Boris and his mother and father, I found out that Dave hadn't shared much about the risks associated with the work he and Anvil Troop were doing here in Bromell. But one thing that he made absolutely clear to his wife, his mother, and his father every time they spoke or he emailed them was how proud he was of the men of Anvil Troop. Dave's mom asked that I pass on that very important message to all of you. We don't mourn the loss of Dave Boris and Adrian Hike today. Instead, we thank God that these men lived, and we celebrate the fact that we were honored and privileged enough to have served with them and alongside them. First Sergeant Lunsford made clear on the tax ed update the other night, Anvil Troop is ready to get back out there and get after it. And as we do, we won't ever forget the sacrifices of these two heroes, Captain Boris and Sergeant Hike. Well, it is Friday, so First Sergeant, begging your pardon. Dave and Adrian, we're going to miss you both, and our pledge is to honor your memory every day we serve. The continued success of Anvil Troop will be your legacy. Sky Soldiers, airborne.
So, I think that, the subject matter is pretty strong. It's pretty sad, but I think that it makes the point with an audio slideshow. I couldn't do that just with photographs on their own. Well, I could, but it wouldn't have the same power. And I think that the audio gives it an extra layer. It brings emotion into it. It puts you there a little bit more. The audio on its own, I don't think would be as effective. The photos on their own wouldn't be as effective. I think together it makes something new. The audio slideshow I particularly like as well, not this one, but in general, the concept of the audio slideshow, because I grew up, Larry Burroughs, the British photographer who, for many years worked in Vietnam and eventually died there, and it is, probably the biggest influence on the work that I do. He lived in a time when photographers could get a spread in Life magazine, and you could have pages and pages of photographs to tell your story, but that doesn't exist anymore. And when I was a younger photographer, lots of other guys and girls that I worked with in London, we all wanted to do these amazing stories, but it was pretty naive because nobody was going to publish them. The biggest story I've ever had was in the Sunday Times magazine. I had 8 pages, which was like 13 pictures, and I had to get shot to get that. You don't get those kind of spreads anymore. But then, but the internet came along, but around the time you were stopping, but nobody had the broadband, so it just didn't work. But now we do have the connectivity, and you can put something like this together, and suddenly I can put 20, 25 pictures and tell a story. That's amazing in itself. Now I can take audio and put it as well, and it gives it a whole new tool, a way of combining these things that didn't exist before. And it's part of this whole multimedia. Now, not everybody's using this. There's a couple of newspapers in the UK that use it. There's people in the States that use it. The Irish Times, I'm very proud of. I introduced the concept of the Irish Times, and actually they're one of the most prolific users of it that I know of. But it's an amazing tool, and it's something that really you can only use. Well, when it came about on the internet, I mean, you could now just do it as sort of a film, as a show reel piece. But really, it's something that's come out of the internet, and I think it's really exciting. I think it's a really useful tool. So I'm going to skip on a bit now. There's a few more other trips that we're jumping over. But what I want to do is take you into the summer in last year, and this is some time that I spent with two different units. I arrived in the middle of summer. The harvest had already started in Afghanistan, and what's interesting is the fact that they've become so inured to the war at this stage that they just get on with their lives. They bring in their harvest. They do whatever they're going to do. And the Americans and Afghan jointly are building this base, this little, what is it, like a checkpoint. And the Afghans are just like, yeah, whatever. We've got our harvest to bring in, and we're just going to mind our own business. But the thing is, they never do get mind their own business, because these are two medevac helicopters that are taking wounded civilians and dead Afghan soldiers away just a few hours later, because they got blown up by an IED that was obviously meant for American soldiers. But the problem is that a lot of the time it's fairly indiscriminate, and a hell of a lot more Afghan civilians get killed by these IEDs than soldiers do. Another amazing, frustrating, thing that makes me so mad is, it's not just Afghanistan. I mean, it's my subject, but everywhere people have preconceived ideas, and the media is as bad as everyone else. You expect a story to be a certain way, so that's the way it gets told. Everybody's seen the pictures from Abu Ghraib, and the famous picture of the guy standing hooded on the box. Lots of pictures of Iraqis blindfolded, and it conjures up ideas of basically war crimes. This is a pretty interesting incident, because all these Afghans got rounded up straight after that IED, and they were being questioned, but they were being questioned by the Afghan army, and the Afghan army were kicking the crap out of these guys, really beating them quite bad. And I saw 2 American soldiers run over to stop what was going on, and it was such a reversal of what you expect. And of course, I never managed to get anyone to run the story, because it wasn't what they expected either. And it's really frustrating, because it doesn't play to the sort of received wisdom, and so it doesn't get used. Particularly, this is the guy I was telling you about earlier. This soldier, who was as captain, he was such an interesting guy, such an interesting guy. He was a filmman himself, and he has this cross tied to his rifle to remind him that he's an instrument of God. Strange to me. And the landscape changes again. This crazy thing. You're in a wild environment where you're looking out for landmines and snipers from far away, and then within a few minutes you're in an urban environment, and suddenly you're looking for a very different kind of danger, and also trying to change the way you shoot your pictures. What was particularly interesting this time was the fact that 3 Americans had been killed just a few days before this in another IED attack, but subsequently there was some screw up and they got left behind, and so the Taliban had taken their bodies out of the vehicle and had mutilated them, and there was obviously quite a severe reaction from the Americans, and it's the only time that I've seen them kicking in doors and going into Afghans' houses themselves, whereas normally they'd say, we're training the Afghan army, it's up to them, it's their country, they can treat women with respect, they understand the local culture, which is all really important. But it was really interesting at this, you know, they were really angry over this, and all of a sudden they were kicking in the doors themselves. And again, these pictures don't maybe look that interesting to a lot of you because, well, we've seen these pictures, we've seen them all before. But that's in Iraq. And in Afghanistan, this was something completely new. But, you know, as a journalist, what I've got to try and overcome is the general fatigue with war pictures, particularly because so much has come out of Iraq over the last 6 years. And, you know, the problem is they wear the same uniforms, an awful lot of it looks the same, and you try and explain to people this is something completely new in Afghanistan, but a lot of the time people don't want to hear. Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of this. I want to show you guys a film, because I just want to get to the sort of the final part of multimedia. This is about 10 minutes long. Some of you will have seen this already, I guess, if you looked at my website. I hope this runs okay on here. And I'm just going to wrap up with this, and then we'll get on to the questions and answers, and people can pull me up on whatever mistakes I've made. Just bear with me a second. This thing has survived a lot. I think the audio on this might be a little bit higher. Try and get it to start from the start. Comes in at about 12 seconds.
This is Kunar province, in eastern Afghanistan. I was on my way to a remote combat outpost. Already, the fighting I'd seen was intense. The last stretch of the journey is too dangerous by road. Everyone must fly in, but even helicopters come under fire.
Building here got hit by a recoilless round. It took the roof off. There were a bunch of soldiers living in it at the time. Nobody got hurt inside it, but you can see what it did to the roof and the sides. And they're all peppered with bullet holes on the side of it too.
I'd come to embed with US Marines in the mountains. Little did I realize that over the next month I would barely venture farther than this trench. My first morning set the tone for things to come.
That's incoming. You hear it cracking, that's incoming like that. That's mortars outgoing.
These guys have spent almost 9 months under fire.
Incoming, incoming. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Go, go!
The Taliban control the high ground and attack almost every day.